We're in chapter 3, about verse 13, but we'll back up to 8 in reading just to put it in front of us. Last week we talked just briefly about the importance of not relegating these accounts to children's stories. We certainly teach them to children for perfectly good reasons about trusting God and doing a number of different things and how God has delivered in the past. But sometimes we can characterize songs as that which are children's, and then we miss the weight of it ourselves. For an example, one of my favorite songs is Jesus Loves Me, and some people laugh at that and they say that's childish. And I say, there's no truth in this world that has changed my life more than that one. I mean, there's no truth in this world that really changes any Christian's life more than that one. And so it's not a child's song. This is not a child's story. This is something committed to deep faith. And so where we have been, of course, we finished chapter 2 and moved into 3 last week. So he has set up an image, who that image is of, if it's just, is it a representation of a god? Is it a representation of himself? Is it an obelisk, which was a common thing that they would build in their own honor? Not absolutely certain, nor does it really change the outcome or change the significance of what's going on. And of course, he has gathered everybody together. The timing of this between chapters 2 and 3 is a little bit difficult to discern. And that would influence some things about some peripheral interpretive issues. But so the basic schools of thought are this happened shortly after chapter 2 in the image. And so when he tells him you're the head of gold and he builds this image of gold, that seems to make logical sense. The fact that he calls everybody together in order to worship and to bow down to this image may indicate, as historians have put forward, that this is a little bit later when there was a rebellion in the midst of Babylon and he put it down, and this was a way of saying you're going to swear your allegiance to Babylon now. Either way, the message of faith remains the same. So in verse 8 it says, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans, and you remember Chaldeans is a term that can refer to the people of Babylon, or in particular, as it does in this context, it can refer to people who are of that profession of interpreting dreams and doing things along those lines, and that's what it's meant here. The Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Literally, they ate them to pieces, is what the Aramaic text reads. And the idea is, of course, that they are just dressing them down. They have nothing positive to say about them. And of course, we talked about the similarities, and we'll see it more when we get to chapter 6. There are similarities between chapters 3 and chapter 6. And so it could be professional jealousy, it could be national jealousy, it could be ethnic jealousy. It could be there are a number of different elements of jealousy that are driving their protest to the king. It says, and they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, a common salutation and a beginning for a prosperity of his reign. You, O king, have made a decree that every man that hears the sound of the horn and the pipe and the lyre and the trigon and the harp and the bagpipe and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews that you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Okay? So they're being brought forward, and this has to be pointed out, which says that this is a private. They are not making a big deal about this. Okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not out starting a campaign that said, we're not going to bow down. They just simply chose not to bow down. And the fact that Nebuchadnezzar has to be told tells you that it's not like a big national internal uprising. It's just something that's been observed and has to be brought to his attention. And so then Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 13, he is in a furious rage, as is his nature. Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" Now, he's in a rage, but I kind of give him somewhat credit here, at least partial credit in my grading system, because he calls them and he asks them, "Is it true?" Do you know how many people hear things and run? As if that is the narrative, that is the truth. That is one of the worst mistakes we can make, and it is a major sign of immaturity. What we have to do is, first, is it true? And one of the things about communication is that it's interesting. So every time we talk about this in theories of preaching, every time that you preach, there are three different ways people hear you. Some people on the right hear their position affirmed. Some on the left hear their position affirmed, and others hear what you actually said. So I am often skeptical, not of the person who's telling me something. I'm just skeptical because I know the nature of communication, of just taking somebody's summary or word for it. It's not that I'm trying to be difficult, but if you're going to report something that somebody said, I'm going to want to hear it myself, and I'm going to want to hear the whole context. Okay? So I can figure out what is actually going on. Because the ability to listen is just that. It's an ability. You have to train that. You have to learn how to do that. And Nebuchadnezzar, to his credit, even though he's angry about it, he says, "Is it true?" So, then he does what he thinks is a charitable act, and he gives them another opportunity. And he says, "If you're ready, when you hear the sounds, fall down and worship the image that I have made, all will be well and good." So, whether it's true or whether it's not, he's kind of reached this conclusion that says, if you do it now, everything is okay. We'll just forget it ever happened. He says, "But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hand?" Now that's where he messed up. So when we were in Kings, in 2 Kings 18, you remember when the Rabshakeh, who was the leader of the Assyrian army, came to the people of Israel, or the people of Judah, under the reign of Hezekiah. And he said, "Look at all the gods of these other nations. Have they been able to deliver their people out of the hands of the king of Assyria?" And he said, "And who is the God that's going to deliver you out of mine?" Well, he picked a fight he couldn't win. Right? Similar to Exodus chapter 5, when God sends Moses to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go into the wilderness that they may worship me." And he says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" Picked a fight you couldn't win. And so, overestimating our strength, our power, our condition, and this comes with when you have people who believe they're accountable to no one. Okay? And the truth of the matter is we are all accountable. And, people can, I guess it makes them feel powerful to say, "I don't answer to anybody." Okay, just skip paying your taxes and I'll visit you in prison for 3 to 5 years. Like, you're accountable, like it or not. We're all accountable to somebody. Okay? So, understanding that we are accountable changes the way we behave, the way we interact with people, the way we handle situations. And Nebuchadnezzar here is, in my opinion, he's a textbook definition of a bully, and I just don't sit well with bullies. An ultimatum that says you either do it my way or No, this is my personality. That does not sit with me. Okay? That just will not fly with me. Anyway. So, he has set the situation. He has made it what it is. And I want you to notice that. These guys are not baiting him into this situation. They're not pressing him. They're not goading him. They're not being disrespectful to him. They are simply answering questions as they are asked to them. They weren't trying to form a public protest. They were just simply choosing to observe what the Torah had said, which was you don't bow yourself to any image. They got called in. They answered the questions. They were respectful. And as they answer his question, they're going to continue to be respectful. And that's something we have to learn and we have to understand. And 1 Peter talks a lot about this as you had Christians facing the first round of Nero's persecution, and he was talking to them about behaving themselves. Even in the midst of standing trial for their faith, they needed to conduct themselves with gentleness and humility. That we're not out looking for a fight. So, they respond, and they answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. In essence, they're saying, look, this decision was made a long time ago. All right? If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now, in this, you see a basic fundamental principle that when you say yes to something, it makes a lot of other decisions easier. Do you think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego sat down the night before all this was supposed to go down and go, okay, what are we going to do? Or do you think the second they read that decree, they knew exactly what they were going to do or what they were not going to do? Because that had been answered a long time ago. When they said that they would worship God in Exodus 20, verses 3 and 4, you'll have no other gods before me, you will not make any graven image or bow yourself down to them or serve them. They made that decision a long time ago. This is not about, and that's what they're trying to say to Nebuchadnezzar, this is not about coming at you, Nebuchadnezzar, like we're just coming after you. This is a decision we made a long time ago. So, we're willing to live with the consequences of the decision that we made, but we are not willing to violate the decision that we made that was the right decision. So, they express their confidence that God is able to deliver them, and one way or the other, he's going to deliver them. Okay? Now, he's going to, on this occasion, deliver them miraculously, but there are other times when, throughout Scripture, people are not delivered, but yet they are delivered. One example is the Apostle Paul. As you threaten him, I've talked about him before as being an unbeatable person. Okay? That is, you can't coerce him. Okay? You turn him loose, and what's he going to do? He's going to preach everywhere. Start churches. You lock him up in prison. He's going to write books in the New Testament. You threaten him and say, I'm going to kill you if you keep doing it. And you know what he says? You give me exactly what I want. Because my desire is to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. How do you beat somebody like that? How do you coerce? You cannot force their will. People who live with the principle that might makes right, when they meet a person like that, they grow insanely frustrated. Because they're used to getting their way through coercion, but you can't coerce these people. And that's what they are saying. And they resign themselves to that. He can deliver us, and I think there are hints within the text that they think he's going to deliver them miraculously. But they say, if that's not how it is, it does not change our decision. If God chooses not to deliver us, it does not change the decision that we made. Which comes to the notion that so many people have that serving God means a life free of persecution and criticism and difficulty. It's just not accurate. If we serve a Lord who was crucified because people hated him, and yet we say, oh, my life will be free from persecution, that doesn't add up to me. Okay? So if we're serving a crucified Lord, as he said, when he was talking to the disciples on at least one occasion, maybe two or three, he said, the servant is not above his master. If they've persecuted me, they'll persecute you. Be okay with that. And so we have to be cautious that we're not expecting and asking God to give us things that Jesus himself was not exempt from. So this answer does not sit well, obviously, with Nebuchadnezzar. He's already upset and angry. So Nebuchadnezzar, filled with fury, the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more hot than it was usually heated. Now, obviously, that's an expression, like he just said, crank it up, basically. 7 times. It's not like they sat there with a thermometer and said, okay, keep adding, oh, I'm up, pull it back, we're not at 7. That's not the point, okay? Make it as hot as possible. And we talked about how it was most likely in the shape of a beehive with some kind of ability to view it from the side. There must have been some kind of door there as well, maybe to fuel the fire, to feed it. And then there seemed to have been some kind of a trap door on the top where they were going to push them through. So it says, and he ordered that some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So, okay, tie them up, cuff them basically in our mentality, and let's throw them in. These men were bound in their cloaks and their tunics, their hats and their garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Now, what's interesting, what shows you how this is a rage-filled incident was because when you executed people, you usually stripped them. They didn't keep their clothes, okay? For an example, when Jesus went to the cross, what are they gambling over at the foot of the cross? Clothes, okay? So it's something that they do in a rage and a fury, and they cast them in and they fall down. And you know, I'm not going to explore it too much, but I do wonder what's going through their head, and however long it takes them to fall, what's going through their head in this process. And then they hit and they realize, oh wait, nothing is happening to me. Like, how does that work? I'm a visual person, so that's like when Jesus feeds a multitude. I think I might have told you before, he feeds the multitude, and he's just breaking bread, and it keeps multiplying. Like, what does that look like? Like, he cracks a piece, and then all of a sudden you're watching, and it's like, boop, it's back. And he cracks another, it's like, boop. Like, how does it work? So they fall down, and they're bound, so they probably fall on their face. It probably doesn't feel well. It says, but verse 22, because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire of those men took up Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. The fire killed those men who took them. And so they're consumed in this process as well, which shows you, which is interesting. So when you're studying, so when we study miracles in Scripture, not just these miracles, but the miracles of the New Testament of Jesus and others, one of the things you do when you're dealing with people who are critical, who don't accept the miraculous elements of Scripture, is the first thing you do is you have to pay attention and examine the text itself and look for evidences in the text itself. Because other groups and other myths have their miraculous stories, but when you look at them, some of the indicators of miraculous ability are absent. Okay? And so when you look at this, and you say, this isn't a miracle. Someone looks at this text and says, it's not a miracle. They obviously fell in the fire, but the fire wasn't that hot. Yeah, but it killed the guys that were just pushing them in. So it's not like he just pushed them in a little campfire. Okay? So when we're studying miracles, especially from that vantage point, and one of the things you see, it's very faith-affirming. When you look at the context of all of these things, you see the elements in the text itself. The evidence is there that everything's pointing to one conclusion from the text itself. Now, there are other layers of things we have to do, but the evidence is always present within the text itself. Okay? So, verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said, true, O king. And he answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Now this to me is just funny. And maybe that's not what I'm supposed to say, but it is funny to me. Okay? You put me in fire. Even if I find out I'm invincible to the fire, my first thing is looking for the exit from the fire. Maybe this is a freak thing. Maybe this isn't going to last. Why test my luck? Exit. Right? He looks at them, and they're just walking around. Like, makes you wonder if they didn't just reach over and go, hey. Hey, that's probably why I never would be delivered. I'd be too much of a smart aleck. I'd be like, but anyway, you come out of here. No, you come in here with me. That's what he's going to tell them. Y'all come out. No, won't you come on in? And so he's obviously astonished by it for many reasons. Number one, that they are not dead. Number two, they're up and walking around and seem fine. And number three, there are 4, but there were only 3 that were put in. So there are a lot of different things going on. And so they're not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th was like a son of the gods. Now, who this is with them is a debated thing, and no one really knows for sure. I can tell you the earliest Christians in the first few centuries interpreted this text to read that this was a pre-incarnate Jesus. You see those elements in the Old Testament where there is definitely a divine being who is manifesting himself to humans. And when you look at the members of the Godhead, you look at the roles that we have revealed in Scripture of the Father and the Son and the Spirit. The Son is always what sometimes we call the active agent. He seems to be the one who, if there's an interaction with the earth and coming down in some kind of a manifestation, that seems to be a role that the Son plays consistently. So later on, it's going to be called an angel when he's praising the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's going to say God sent his angel. But what we have to remember is the word angel in Hebrew, malach, and the word angel in Greek, the New Testament, angelos, those are just generic terms. They don't always imply an angelic being the way we think of them. Okay? It just simply means a messenger. For an example, James 2:24, when Rahab received the messengers by faith, her works came together with her faith, and she received the spies and sent them out another way. The messengers, the Greek term there is angelos. You could just as easily translate an angel. Context determines whether you're dealing with a supernatural creature or just another person who's carrying a message or something. So, obviously, this is going to be some kind of a supernatural creature. Okay? Jewish tradition said it was Gabriel. Early Christian tradition said it was a pre-incarnate Jesus. I don't know. It was a representative of God, and they were fine. I'd kind of like the Cliff Notes on what they talked about probably, but So anyway, you'll have to make up your own mind on those things. But I want you to also see something else that's hinted at in the New Testament. God delivered them. He did not deliver them from the fire. They still had to go in the fire. He delivered them through fire. Okay? Now, the reason I bring that up is because in Romans 8, when Paul is dealing with the difficulties and the things that cannot separate us from the love of Christ, he says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or the sword? As it is written," this is a quotation from Psalms, "For your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered." And then he says this, "No" is the answer to those questions. "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Notice he does not say, "in spite of all these things." He says, "in them." You see, tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, and sword are not symbols of God's displeasure. Many times they are symbols of his pleasure and of his deliverance. And if we look, which we don't have the time to look at in any detail, but if you look at Colossians 2, where he talks about the crucifixion of Jesus, he says that he disarmed principalities and powers. And the idea is he stripped them of their dignity. Now, if you take that to the cross and the crucifixion story, what were they doing to Jesus? They were stripping him of his clothing to beat him, to crucify him. They were stripping him of his dignity. They were, or thought they were. And they were kneeling down in front of him, making fun of him, hitting him over the head, mocking him as a king. And what Paul is saying in Colossians is the whole time they thought they were stripping him of his power, it was that very thing that he was using to strip the devil and his minions of their power. And so appearances, things may not be what they appear. So if you just look at them from human eyes, it looks like that's a tragedy. If you look at them through God's eyes, that becomes the power of God to save man, 1 Corinthians 1. So, how we look at all these things matters. And that bell says, that clock on the back says I got 4, and so does my watch, and it's radio powered. So we're going to go with it. It says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.' Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men." Now here's another internal textual manifestation. "The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them." Look, if somebody burns anything in the vicinity of your house and you go outside, you're going to smell like it. I know, my neighbor burns his backyard. I got nothing against him. It's just a fact. He burns it, and when I go outside, I come back in, and we smell like burnt dogs. So the fact that they go into the fire, they're not harmed by the fire, and nothing, not a hair on their head is singed, their clothes don't smell like anything, it's indicating the fact that they're in absolute perfect and pristine condition. And it's similar to Nehemiah 9 maybe. Deuteronomy 8 certainly, Nehemiah 9 maybe, where he talks about them in the wilderness wanderings, and he says, "All these 40 years I led you in the wilderness, and your feet did not swell and your sandals did not wear out." Brooke still has shoes from high school. I don't. All right? So a few more years and they might be wilderness shoes, but not right now. I don't keep them very long. Why are these details brought to us? They're showing the deliverance of God. It's not like God is sitting in heaven going, oh no, they got the fiery furnace out. We got enough people here. I mean, this is going to be a close one. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get them through it. No. I'm going to put them in casing and send them out, and they're going to be in perfect condition. God is not a God who barely gets by. He has abundant power, and that's what Nebuchadnezzar says. And he said, he sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command because they yielded up their bodies rather than to serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for no other God is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And when he says those words, no other God is able to rescue this way, the hearts of all of God's people say, that's right. And so this is why they are captured in Hebrews 11 and verse 34 as in the hall of faith as people who quenched the power of fire. And so that's what we're looking at. May have an application or two we look at the next week, but we'll definitely move into chapter 4 next Wednesday.